It began with a simple disagreement, the kind you'd expect to resolve over a cup of coffee or a quick chat by the mailbox. I was wrong. My neighbor Karen Davis had other plans that would unravel into a saga of spite, vandalism, and sweet justice. The trouble started over a strip of land along our shared property line, a narrow easement that granted me access to a creek bubbling through the back of my lot. That creek was my sanctuary where I'd sit with Pixel, my scruffy mutt, and listen to the water while the bees from my hives hummed nearby. Karen, however, saw that strip as her personal empire. It was early spring, the air still crisp, when I noticed wooden posts sprouting along the boundary. Karen was planting a fence, without a permit, without a survey, and smack on the easement. I knocked on her door, hoping to clear things up. She answered in a pastel tracksuit, her platinum blonde hair pulled tight, eyes narrowing as I explained the issue. "This is my land," she snapped, jabbing a manicured finger at the posts. "The HOA says I can protect my property." I tried to stay calm, mentioning the easement clause in our deeds, but she slammed the door before I could finish. I dug out the paperwork that night, deed, plat map, and a letter from the county confirming my creek access. The next morning, I taped a polite note to Karen's door, attaching copies of the documents and suggesting we talk. By noon, she'd torn it down and left a voicemail. "Stop harassing me or I'll call the sheriff." I sighed, rubbing Pixel's ears. This was escalating faster than I'd expected. True to her word, Karen called the sheriff. Deputy Rogers, a lanky man with a no-nonsense mustache, pulled into my driveway the next day. I greeted him with the documents, a thermos of coffee, and an apology for the trouble. He skimmed the papers, nodding. "Looks clear to me," he said, handing them back. "Let's see what Ms. Davis has to say." We walked to Karen's house, where she stood on her porch, arms crossed, reciting a litany of complaints. I was trespassing, my bees were a nuisance, my dog was feral. Rogers listened, then held up my deed. "Ma'am, this easement's legal, your fence is not. Take it down or the county will." Karen's face reddened, but she muttered, "Fine." Rogers tipped his hat. "Have a pleasant day." I thought that was the end. Pixel and I walked to the creek that evening, the posts still standing but untouched. I figured Karen would sulk, maybe file an HOA complaint, then move on. But as the sun dipped below the pines, I saw her watching from her window, phone in hand, her expression cold. A chill ran through me, not from the spring air, but from the certainty that Karen wasn't done. The next week proved me right. Karen didn't remove the posts. Instead, she doubled down, adding chain-link panels and a padlock gate, cutting off my creek path entirely. I called the county, who sent a cease and desist letter. Karen ignored it. I contacted the HOA, expecting backup, but their president, a guy named Chandler, sent a vague email about reviewing the matter. Frustrated, I hired a lawyer, Elliot, who filed for an injunction. "She's banking on you giving up," Elliot said, adjusting his glasses. "People like her thrive on intimidation." I wasn't intimidated, but I was tired. Maintaining the hives, keeping Pixel's walk safe, and now dealing with Karen's nonsense was draining. I started documenting everything, photos of the fence, timestamps of her calls to the sheriff, even the HOA's non-responses. Elliot suggested a surveyor to mark the boundary officially, so I booked Nora Beltran, a no-nonsense professional who'd seen her share of property feuds. "This Karen sounds like a piece of work," Nora said, hammering a fluorescent stake into the ground. "Don't worry, we'll set this right." That night I sat on my porch, Pixel snoring at my feet, the creek's faint gurgle blocked by Karen's gate. The stars were bright, but my mind was cloudy. Karen's defiance wasn't just about the land, it was personal. She wanted control, and I was in her way. I didn't know then how far she'd go or how her own schemes would unravel. But as I locked my door and turned off the porch light, I knew one thing: this spark was about to ignite something much bigger. Karen's illegal fence was just the beginning. 2 weeks after Deputy Rogers told her to take it down, I came home to a scene that turned my stomach. My fence along the creek was sliced open in 3 places, the chain link sagging like torn fabric. Deep tire marks gouged the mud near the easement, and one of my beehives lay in ruins, frames splintered, honey oozing into the grass. Worst of all, Pixel, my loyal mutt, was limping, a nailboard hidden in the debris lodged in his paw. His yelp of pain echoed in my ears as I rushed him to the vet. "He'll need antibiotics," Dr. Patel said, bandaging Pixel's paw. "Watch for infection, and whoever did this, they're dangerous." I nodded, anger simmering. Karen had crossed a line, and I was done playing nice. I wasn't about to let her win. That night, I ordered 4 motion sensor cameras with night vision, set to ping my phone every 10 seconds until I silenced them. I also called Nora Beltran, the surveyor, to reinforce the property line. Nora arrived the next day, her truck loaded with fluorescent stakes and laminated placards warning of criminal penalties for tampering with survey markers. "This is war now," she said, hammering a stake into the ground. "People like your neighbor don't stop unless you make them." By dusk, the boundary was marked, bright and undeniable, a neon challenge to Karen's ego. I barely slept, my phone propped on the nightstand, waiting for the cameras to catch something. At 1:13 a.m. they did. The first ping jolted me awake, followed by a flood of alerts. The live stream showed 2 figures in hoodies creeping along the creek. One, tall and lanky, wielded bolt cutters, snipping Nora's stakes with ease. The other, shorter, with platinum blonde hair spilling from her hood, tossed the stakes into the water. Moonlight caught the taller figure's face, Chandler, the HOA's shady bookkeeper known to Deputy Rogers from past run-ins. The blonde was unmistakable. Karen, her smirk clear even in grainy night vision. My heart raced. I had them. I called Rogers at dawn, sending him the footage. "That's Chandler, all right," he said, voice grim. "And Ms. Davis, I'll need a warrant, but this is solid." By 7 a.m., he had one for criminal mischief and trespassing. I watched from my porch as Rogers and two deputies rolled up to Chandler's trailer. Body cam footage later showed him in pajama pants, bleary-eyed, insisting he'd been asleep all night. Rogers held up a still from my camera, Chandler mid-grimace, bolt cutters glinting. "Care to explain?" Rogers asked. Chandler's jaw dropped and he went silent. Karen was next. Rogers knocked on her door, warrant in hand. She answered in a silk robe, feigning surprise, but her garage told a different story. There, stacked neatly, were Nora's stolen stakes, her laminated placards, and a half-empty can of spray paint, neon red, the same color defacing my no trespassing signs. Karen stammered, claiming Chandler had stored tools there without her knowledge. Rogers wasn't buying it. "You're on camera, ma'am," he said, cuffing her. "Let's go." Both were hauled to county jail. Karen, with her HOA connections, made bond by lunch, strutting out like she'd won. Chandler wasn't so lucky. His 2021 check-kiting conviction had him on probation, and this stunt triggered a no-bond hold pending a revocation hearing. Rogers called me later, chuckling. Chandler's sweating in a cell and Karen's lawyers already yelling, "You did good with those cameras." I wasn't celebrating yet. Pixel's paw was healing, but the vet bill stung and my beehive was a total loss. I spent the afternoon boarding up the fence cuts and checking the remaining hives, their hum a small comfort. Elliot, my lawyer, was already planning the next move. "This isn't just vandalism," he said over the phone. "Karen's got HOA backing and Chandler's involved. We need to dig into their records." I agreed, sensing this was bigger than a fence or a creek. As night fell, I sat with Pixel, his bandaged paw resting on my knee. The cameras were still live, scanning the dark. Karen was out on bond and I didn't trust her to stop. The footage was my shield, but it was also a spark, one that would ignite a firestorm of consequences for her and Chandler. They thought they could bully me into submission. They were about to learn how wrong they were. With Karen out on bond and Chandler stuck in county jail, I thought the worst was over. The cameras had done their job and Deputy Rogers had the evidence to back it up. But Karen's defiance and Chandler's shady past hinted at a deeper mess. My lawyer Elliot saw it too. "This isn't just about your fence," he said, flipping through my property documents. "Karen's got HOA clout and Chandler's their bookkeeper. We need to follow the money." That call set off a chain of discoveries that turned a petty land dispute into a full-blown scandal. Elliot started by subpoenaing the HOA's financial records, zeroing in on the $3,500 gate Karen had illegally installed to block my creek access. The paper trail led to a cashier's check signed by Chandler drawn from the HOA's reserve account. It was sloppy, no board approval, no contractor invoice, just Chandler's signature and a vague memo. "Security upgrade." Elliot's eyes gleamed. "This is fraud," he said, "and I bet it's not the only one." He was right. Digging deeper, we uncovered a series of checks totaling $46,900, all for grounds improvements that never happened. Phantom landscaping, non-existent irrigation systems, even a $12,000 community fountain that was just a patch of dirt. Chandler had been bleeding the HOA dry, and the gate was his latest scam. The HOA board was blindsided. At an emergency meeting, they pored over the records, faces pale as Elliot presented the evidence. Karen, a board member, had signed off on several of Chandler's fake invoices, her initials scrawled in green ink. The board voted unanimously to press charges against Chandler and remove Karen from her position. "We had no idea," the new president, Ms. Larson, told me later, her voice shaky. "We trusted them." I nodded, but my focus was on justice, not sympathy. Detective Miriam Page from the county's white-collar crime unit took over the investigation. She seized Chandler's home computer, a dusty tower that held a goldmine of deceit, forged receipts, fake meeting minutes, and a Word template for the neon green approval stamps used on his sham documents. Most damning was a spreadsheet tracking payments to Karen's personal account, labeled as consulting fees. Over $15,000 had flowed to her in the past year, funneled through Chandler's schemes. "This is conspiracy to commit theft," Page said, her tone clipped. "They're both in deep." Karen lawyered up fast, hearing James Hall, a defense attorney who charged $600 an hour and answered questions with a smirk. Hall filed motions to suppress the camera footage, claiming it violated Karen's privacy. Elliot countered with case law and the judge shut Hall down, ruling the footage admissible since it was recorded on my property. Karen's bravado faltered, but she stayed silent, letting Hall do the talking. Chandler, meanwhile, was sweating. Facing probation revocation for his 2021 check-kiting conviction and new felony charges for theft and fraud, he was desperate. Page offered him a deal, testify against Karen, and the DA might shave time off his sentence. Chandler took it, signing a plea agreement that promised full cooperation. The fallout brought small victories. The HOA, scrambling to clean house, froze Chandler's accounts, recovering enough to send me a $4,500 check for my destroyed beehive and fence repairs. Pixel's paw was healing, and the vet gave him a clean bill of health, though I still checked his bandage daily. Nora Beltran, the surveyor, stopped by to replace her stolen stakes free of charge. "You're making enemies of the right people," she said with a grin, hammering a new marker into the ground. I laughed, but the weight of the fight lingered. Karen was still out there, and her lawyer's motions kept the case dragging. As I walked Pixel along the creek, now free of Karen's gate, I felt a mix of relief and resolve. The financial records, Chandler's plea, and the HOA's awakening were wins, but they came at a cost: sleepless nights, legal fees, and the constant hum of vigilance. The cameras stayed on, their red lights glowing in the dark. Karen and Chandler had underestimated me, but the battle wasn't over. Elliot was already prepping for trial, and Paige's investigation was uncovering more of Karen's ties to Chandler's fraud. The creek bubbled softly, and Pixel wagged his tail, oblivious to the storm brewing. I scratched his ears, knowing we were closer to justice, but not there yet. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Months of legal wrangling, subpoenas, motions, and Chandler's plea deal had led to this: the trial of Karen Davis and her accomplice Chandler for their campaign against my land and the HOA's funds. My lawyer Elliot sat beside me, his briefcase stuffed with evidence, camera footage, financial records, and Detective Paige's forensic reports. Pixel was safe at home, his paw fully healed, but the scars of Karen's vendetta, my ruined beehive, the slashed fence, were fresh in my mind. Today, justice would speak. Chandler had already pled guilty to his probation violation from the 2021 check kiting scheme, earning an automatic 18-month sentence. For the new charges, felony theft, fraud, and conspiracy, the DA offered a deal: 4 years with parole eligibility and 2 if he testified truthfully against Karen. He took it, and his testimony was a bombshell. On the stand, Chandler, pale and fidgety in an ill-fitting suit, detailed Karen's scheme to annex my creekside land. "She promised me a cut," he said, voice low. "Said the HOA would back her and I'd get a piece once it was hers." He admitted to forging HOA documents, funneling $15,000 to Karen as consulting fees, and joining her in the midnight stake-pulling mission. The prosecutor played my Ring camera footage. 12:47 a.m., Karen and Chandler loading rebar into her SUV, the timestamp matching the night Nora's survey stakes vanished. The jury leaned forward, eyes locked on the screen. Karen's defense attorney, James Hall, tried to spin it. He painted Chandler as a liar desperate to save himself, claiming Karen was an innocent victim of his fraud. But the evidence was ironclad. My motion sensor footage showed Karen tossing stakes into the creek, her platinum blonde hair unmistakable. Detective Paige's spreadsheet linked her bank account to Chandler's payouts, and the spray paint in her garage matched my defaced signs. Hall's objections crumbled under the weight of facts. Karen sat stone-faced, her pastel tracksuit swapped for a navy blazer, but her clenched jaw betrayed her. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: felony conspiracy, theft, criminal mischief, and misdemeanor trespassing. The courtroom buzzed as the foreman read the verdict. Karen's bond was revoked, and she was led away in cuffs, her eyes darting to the exit. Chandler, already in custody, just bowed his head. At sentencing, the judge didn't hold back. Karen got 18 months in prison, $32,000 in restitution to me for damages, and $46,900 to the HOA for the embezzled funds. A 5-year no-contact order would follow her release. Chandler's 4-year plea deal stood, tacked onto his probation sentence. As Karen passed me, I caught her gaze and gave a polite wave, not out of spite, but because it felt like closing a chapter. She looked away. The victory was bittersweet. The legal battle had drained my savings, and the beehive I'd lost was one my dad had helped me build years ago. But small wins emerged. The HOA, now under new leadership, sent a formal apology and used Chandler's frozen assets to cover my vet bills and fence repairs. I started rebuilding, literally and figuratively. On the disputed land where Karen's gate once stood, I broke ground for a greenhouse. The smell of fresh soil and tomato starts filled the air, and my remaining hives hummed with life. Pixel, fully recovered, bounded along the creek path, chasing dragonflies. The community began to heal too. The HOA board, humiliated by Chandler's fraud, implemented new oversight and invited me to speak at a meeting. I declined the spotlight but suggested they fund a pollinator garden to replace Karen's sterile lawn. They agreed, and Sprout Tomorrow, a local nonprofit, offered to help. It felt like a turning point, not just for me, but for the neighborhood Karen had tried to control. As I locked the greenhouse one evening, the sunset painting the creek gold, I thought about the fight. The cameras, the late-night calls with Elliot, the sting of Pixel's injury, it was worth it. Karen and Chandler's greed had unraveled their world, while mine was growing stronger. The bees were thriving, the greenhouse was taking shape, and the creek bubbled free. I scratched Pixel's ears, his tail thumping. We won more than a lawsuit, we'd reclaimed our peace. But the story wasn't over. Karen's shadow lingered, and new challenges were on the horizon. For now, though, I'd take the win and let the future come. The dust of the trial settled, and with Karen behind bars and Chandler serving time, I could finally breathe. The creek along my property flowed freely again, its gentle gurgle a reminder of what I'd fought for. Pixel, my scruffy companion, was back to his old self, his paw healed, chasing squirrels with reckless joy. The scars of Karen's vendetta, my slashed fence, the ruined beehive, still stung, but the verdict had brought closure and a chance to rebuild. The land dispute was over, and I was ready to turn the page, planting seeds for a future untainted by her schemes. The HOA, shaken by Chandler's $46,900 embezzlement and Karen's complicity, underwent a quiet revolution. A new board took over, led by Ms. Larson, a retired teacher with a no-nonsense streak. They mailed me a formal apology, typed on crisp letterhead, along with a $4,500 check from Chandler's frozen accounts to cover my beehive repairs, Pixel's vet bills, and the fence I'd patched up. "We failed you," Larson wrote. "We're making it right." I deposited the check, grateful but wary. The HOA had been Karen's weapon once. I'd keep my guard up. With the restitution, I got to work. The strip of land Karen had tried to annex, where her illegal gate once blocked my creek path, became my canvas. I'd always dreamed of a greenhouse, a place to grow heirloom tomatoes and herbs through the seasons. Now, with the legal battles behind me, I hired a local contractor to build it. The structure went up fast, glass panels glinting in the sun, a cedar frame smelling of fresh wood. Inside, I filled trays with soil, planting basil, peppers, and cherry tomatoes, their green tips poking through by week's end. The bees, thriving in their repaired hives, buzzed nearby, pollinating my new venture. Every morning, I'd walk Pixel to the creek, then check the greenhouse, the routine grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in months. The neighborhood began to shift, too. Karen's arrest had exposed cracks in the HOA's foundation, and residents were eager to rebuild trust. At a community meeting, Larson proposed a pollinator garden on a vacant lot, inspired by my suggestion. I connected them with Sprout Tomorrow, an organic farming nonprofit I'd worked with before. Their director, Lena, was thrilled. "Let's turn this into a community hub," she said, sketching plans for native wildflowers and butterfly bushes. I offered to consult on bee-friendly plants, and Lena grinned. "Your trouble in the best way," she teased. I shrugged, but the compliment landed. Karen had tried to isolate me, now I was helping the community grow. Small victories piled up. The vet confirmed Pixel was infection-free, his limp gone. Nora Beltran, the surveyor who marked my property line, sent a card with a photo of her latest job, writing, "Keep giving M hell." Even Deputy Rogers stopped by one afternoon off duty to check in. "You stirred up a hornet's nest," he said, leaning against his truck, "but you did good." I offered him a jar of honey from my hives, and he accepted with a rare smile. These moments, quiet and human, felt like stitches closing a wound. Yet I knew the story wasn't finished. Karen's 18-month sentence and $78,900 in restitution were a win, but her influence lingered in the HOA's old guard, and Chandler's plea deal hinted at more secrets. I kept the cameras on, their red lights blinking in the dark just in case. Elliot, ever vigilant, was monitoring the HOA's reforms, ready to pounce if they slipped. "You've got enemies, but you've got allies now, too," he said over coffee one morning. I nodded, sipping my drink. The greenhouse, the bees, Pixel's wagging tail, they were my anchors, but I was prepared for whatever came next. As summer faded, I stood in the greenhouse, pruning tomato vines, the air thick with the scent of earth and growth. Pixel sprawled in the grass outside, basking in the sun. The creek bubbled beyond the open path, no gates in sight. I'd won back my land, my peace, and a piece of the community Karen had tried to control. The pollinator garden was taking shape, and Sprout Tomorrow's plans were expanding. This wasn't just a fresh start, it was a new chapter, one I'd write on my terms. But as I locked the greenhouse door, I couldn't shake the feeling that another spark was out there, waiting to ignite. A year after Karen's conviction, the creek by my property flowed unimpeded, its gentle ripple a quiet victory. The greenhouse stood proud where her illegal gate once blocked my path, its glass panels catching the morning light. Inside, tomato vines climbed trellises and basil scented the air. Pixel, fully recovered from the nailbird incident, bounded through the grass, chasing dragonflies. My bees hummed in their hives, their numbers rebounding after the vandalism. The scars of Karen's vendetta, sliced fences, stolen survey stakes, had faded, replaced by growth and purpose. But just when I thought the saga was over, new ripples stirred, proving that closure comes with unexpected twists. It started with a letter, delivered in a plain envelope with a shaky handwritten address. The sender was Elaine Castor, claiming to be Karen's cousin and heir. She insisted Karen had granted her a private right-of-way across my land, citing a supposed deed from before Karen's arrest. The document attached to the letter was a poorly forged mess, wrong parcel number, misspelled street name, and a notary stamp that looked like it came from a craft store. I called Elliot, my lawyer, who laughed dryly. "She's fishing," he said, "probably hoping you'll settle to avoid a fight." We filed a motion to dismiss, and Nora Beltran, my surveyor, provided a sworn affidavit confirming the deed's falsehood. Elaine withdrew her claim before the court date, her lawyer citing clerical errors. I didn't buy it. This was Karen's shadow, reaching from her prison cell, testing my resolve. I reinforced the cameras, their red lights vigilant in the dark. The legal win was satisfying, but smaller, stranger developments followed. The state's crime victim fund sent me a restitution check, $58, garnished from Karen's prison wages. It was a drop in the bucket compared to the $78,900 she owed me in the HOA, but the symbolism hit hard. She'd spent decades paying, a monthly reminder of her defeat. I framed the check, hanging it in my home office next to a photo of Pixel by the creek. Elliot called it petty, I called it poetic. Then came the most surprising twist, a letter from Chandler. Postmarked from the state penitentiary, it arrived with a hand-drawn map tucked inside, suggesting orchard placements for my property, apple and pear trees with notes on sunlight and drainage. In careful, slanted handwriting, Chandler apologized. I was greedy and Karen used that, he wrote. I hurt you, your dog, your bees, I'm sorry. He'd earned a paralegal certificate in prison, he said, and was studying land use law. The map was his attempt at amends, a gesture rooted in remorse. I sat on my porch, Pixel snoring at my feet, and reread the letter. Chandler had been Karen's pawn, but he'd also chosen to wield the bolt cutters. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but I wrote back, keeping it short. Sunflowers are taller than ever. Thanks for the map. No promises. I mailed it, unsure if I meant it, but the act felt like releasing a weight. The neighborhood, too, was finding its own closure. Sprout Tomorrow, the organic farming nonprofit, had bought Karen's foreclosed property at auction. They'd raised her manicured lawn, replacing it with raised garden beds and wildflower patches. Lena, their director, invited me to consult on native pollinators, and I spent a Saturday sketching plans for milkweed and coneflowers to draw monarchs. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen's land, once a symbol of control, was now a community asset. At their first volunteer day, I loaned them my brush cutter, watching as neighbors, some former Karen loyalists, worked side by side. Deputy Rogers showed up off-duty, hauling mulch in his pickup. Never thought I'd be gardening on her lawn, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. I laughed, handing him a water bottle. Life's funny like that. The garden's transformation was more than physical. It healed something in the community, stitching together trust Karen had torn apart. New HOA members, vetted and transparent, joined the effort, and Ms. Larson, the board president, personally thanked me for exposing the fraud. You didn't just save your land, she said. You saved us from ourselves. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise, but her words lingered. The creek, the greenhouse, the bees, they were mine again, but the garden belonged to everyone. As spring bloomed, I walked the property with Pixel, the air thick with pollen and promise. The greenhouse yielded its first tomatoes, ruby red and sweet. The bees danced between hives and wildflowers, their hum a steady pulse. Chandler's map sat on my desk, unopened but not forgot. Elaine's failed claim was a memory, and Karen's garnished wages were a quiet victory. The cameras stayed on, but their alerts were rare, the night undisturbed. Sprout Tomorrow's garden thrived across the street, a living rebuke to Karen's legacy. Standing by the creek, I tossed a stick for Pixel, his tail a blur. The water sparkled, free of gates and grudges. This was full circle, not just the end of a fight, but the start of something enduring. Karen's schemes had backfired, turning her land into a gift for the community, her defeat into my strength. I didn't know what lay ahead, but with the bees buzzing, the garden growing, and Pixel at my side, I was ready. The spark had ignited a fire, and from its ashes we'd all found a way to bloom. A year after Karen's conviction, the air around my property felt lighter, the creeks murmur a quiet anthem of triumph. The greenhouse built where her illegal gate once stood glowed with morning light, its tomato vines heavy with fruit. Pixel, my scruffy mutt, tore through the grass, his paw long healed from the nailboard trap. The bees hummed in their rebuilt hives, their numbers stronger than ever. Karen's campaign, sliced fences, stolen stakes, embezzled funds had crumbled under the weight of evidence and resolve. Her 18-month sentence and $78,900 in restitution were justice, but the real victory was what grew in her absence: peace, purpose, and a community reborn. Yet, as I'd learned, closure comes with surprises, and Karen's shadow wasn't entirely gone. It began with a letter from Elaine Castor, claiming to be Karen's cousin and heir. She demanded a right-of-way across my land, waving a deed that was laughably fake, wrong lot number, a forged signature, and a notary seal that screamed photocopy. I called Elliot, my lawyer, who snorted. She's trying to rattle you, he said, classic shakedown. We countered with Nora Beltran's survey records and a motion to dismiss. Elaine folded before the hearing, her lawyer muttering about misfiled paperwork. I wasn't fooled. This was Karen's last jab, thrown from her prison cell. I checked the cameras, their red lights steady in the night, and slept a little easier knowing her reach was weakening. Restitution brought another small win. The state's crime victim fund sent a $58 check garnished from Karen's prison wages. It was a fraction of what she owed, but I framed it beside a photo of Pixel by the creek, a reminder of her slow, symbolic defeat. More surprising was a letter from Chandler, postmarked from prison. Inside was a hand-drawn orchard map, apples, pears, notes on soil pH. I was wrong, he wrote, his script careful. Karen pulled me in, but I chose to hurt you. I'm sorry. He'd earned a paralegal certificate, he said, and wanted to make amends. I sat with Pixel on the porch, the letter heavy in my hands. Chandler had wielded the bolt cutters, but Karen had aimed him. I wrote back, sunflowers are thriving, thanks for the map, no promises. Mailing it felt like loosening a knot, not forgiveness, but a step toward release. The neighborhood was transforming, too, in ways Karen could never have imagined. Sprout Tomorrow, an organic farming nonprofit, bought her foreclosed property, turning her sterile lawn into a vibrant community garden. Raised beds brimmed with zucchini and kale, while wildflower patches drew butterflies. I consulted on pollinator plants, recommending milkweed and lavender to lure bees and monarchs. Lena, Sprout Tomorrow's director, called it poetic. Karen tried to choke this place, she said. Now it's alive. Their first volunteer day was a revelation. I loaned my brush cutter and neighbors, some once loyal to Karen, showed up with shovels. Deputy Rogers off duty hauled compost in his truck, grinning. "Never thought I'd be digging here," he said. Ms. Larson, the new HOA president, planted seedlings alongside us, her hands dirty and her smile genuine. The air smelled of earth and sweat, a cleansing contrast to Karen's rain. The garden became a symbol of renewal. The HOA, humbled by Chandler's $46,900 fraud, adopted strict oversight and funded Sprout Tomorrow's work. Larson thanked me privately, her voice soft. "You exposed them," she said. "This garden because of you." I brushed it off, but the words landed. Karen had used the HOA to divide us. Now it was a bridge. Volunteers laughed as they weeded, kids ran through sprinkler mist, and the garden's first tomatoes, red as my greenhouse harvest, were shared at a potluck. I brought honey from my hives, and Rogers teased me about starting a bee empire. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like home. As summer waned, I walked the creek path with Pixel, the water glinting under a fatting sun. The greenhouse yielded basil and peppers, the bees danced, and the garden across the street bloomed. Elaine's claim was a memory, Karen's wages a trickle of justice, Chandler's letter a quiet echo. The cameras stayed on, but their alerts were silent. I tossed a stick for Pixel, his tail a blur, and thought of the spark that started it all, Karen's fence, her greed, her downfall. That spark had ignited a fire, burning away her control and leaving fertile ground. Her land was now a garden, her defeat my strength, and the community's unity a final victory. Standing by the creek, I knew the circle was complete. Whatever came next, we'd face it together, rooted in what we'd built from the ashes. October brought Sprout Tomorrow's harvest dinner, held on Karen's former property, now a thriving community garden. Tables groaned with garden-fresh dishes, roasted butternut squash, garlic honey carrots, heirloom tomato bruschetta. Neighbors laughed, sharing stories under string lights, the air warm with camaraderie. I got a nod for my role in Karen's downfall, but I shrugged it off. The real victory was this: nourishment where hostility once festered. The greenhouse flourished, my bees buzzed, and Pixel romped freely, his paw a distant memory. Using reclaimed wood from Karen's old fence, I built a permitted barn, its cedar frame a testament to resilience. It stood as both a reminder of the past and a promise of new beginnings. The creek flowed unobstructed, its ripple a quiet song of peace. Karen's garnished wages trickled in, and Chandler's letter lingered in my desk drawer. The garden across the street bloomed, a symbol of community reborn. As I locked the barn under a harvest moon, Pixel at my side, I felt the weight of the fight lift. We'd earned this closure, this forward stride, and whatever lay ahead, we were ready.